I mean, what has happened is that, even before the first elections, workers, individual workers, I mean, and this is the sort of dynamic that's gone, on almost 169 times, some version of this dynamic. They read about the organizing in Buffalo, either through the incredible media coverage the campaign has generated, or through the social media coverage. Of course, it's had great social media, More Perfect Unions had great coverage of it. DSA, lots of groups have had really, really great coverage. So they hear about the campaign that way. They reach out by Facebook, by Twitter, by email. They have a Zoom meeting with one of the lead organizers in Buffalo. They tell them, okay, here's what you need to do. Here's how you're the lead organizer. Here's how you form an organizing committee. Here's how you print up authorization cards. Here's how you reach out to undecided workers. Here's how you answer Starbucks anti-union talking points. Here's how you write the Dear Howard letter requesting union recognition. And here's how you mail your cards to the NLRB to petition for an election. And that's the sort of dynamic that's, played out time and time and time again. And you think, well, who are these people? And you kind of know who they are. I mean, I know this group in particular. So some of them have had prior union experience, but most of them have not. I mean, these are young people we're talking about for the most part. I mean, if you compare it with Amazon, the Amazon labor union activists, most of them were, I think average age was maybe like 27 years old, younger than the workforce as a whole. Starbucks, it tends to be a little bit the opposite. The lead organizers tend to be a little bit older than the average Starbucks worker, so they tend to be around that age too, 25, 26, 27. But there's certainly exceptions. Mill Valley organizing was led by two 17-year-olds, Santa Cruz by a 19-year-old, et cetera, et cetera. So we've had all of these, and they often are people who have had no prior union experience.
Let's wrap up, John.
Yeah. So they're often leftists. They're often being inspired by Bernie's presidential campaigns, or by Black Lives Matter, by feminist movements, by environmental justice movements, etc. They support unions, but they haven't had any prior experience. They don't actually know all of the things you're supposed to do in an organizing campaign. They're mostly doing it through intuition. Shift supervisors have been really key. They're not part of management. They're able to vote, and they're often they have a lot of influence within the workplace. So time and time again, they've told me, even in the most conservative parts of the country, it's not that difficult actually to sign up most of the workers in your store. And, I will wrap up because I know, especially it's boring to listen to someone who doesn't even have the camera on, especially. But, there are characteristics about the workers I could talk about, and the sort of sense of camaraderie amongst the workers, who they are, that has really assisted the organizing campaign. And, if anyone's interested, and the nature of the work, this average size of the bargaining unit is 26 employees. There's very little managerial supervision. Most of the time they're working, they can talk to each other, including about unions. And so that's what they do. And so, I'm sorry, that was like just really my introduction to the what's going on. But so I'm honestly happy to talk about any aspect of it at all. I know people out there, you're knowledgeable about union campaigns. You probably think, he didn't talk about this, he didn't talk about that, he didn't talk about something else. And I'm sure that's completely true, but I will gladly talk or try to talk about anything at all that interests people about the campaign. So thank you, and I'm sorry for going on too long.
Please don't apologize, John. Thank you very much. Lucky for you, you had good material to work with. So we miss seeing your face. For those just joining us, because we did get the live stream going, this is our Tempest sponsored labor panel to discuss the revenge of the essential worker, what's next for labor in 2022. We've just had our first speaker, John Logan, who is the Director of Labor Studies at San Francisco State University. And we're moving on to the second speaker, Andy Sernatinger, whose name I'm sure I always mispronounce. It's just too long. Is one of the founding members of the Tempest Collective. In a moment, I'll drop a link in the chat if somebody else hasn't. And has written a number of articles, not just on labor issues, on his perspective as a revolutionary inside of the DSA, and various questions that I guess he's going to touch on here in his next 10 to 12 minutes. So go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Sherry. So I'm going to talk mostly about what's happening in the Teamsters Union. I'm a member of Teamsters Local 695 in Madison, Wisconsin. And the Teamsters are kind of having their moment in the sun right now. A lot of people are talking about the Teamsters for a number of reasons. For one, the Teamsters have a pretty enormous cultural footprint, they have this reputation of being like tough unionists. Everybody knows Jimmy Hoffa, or if they don't, they kind of know what that means. But in the last year in particular, the Teamsters have been all over the media and talked a lot about in the labor movement for a few reasons. The first is because there was an election last year. The Teamsters are one of very few unions that have a direct member ballot for the top leadership. And there was a new president. Jimmy Hoffa Jr. was the president for more than 20 years and just retired. So I'll talk about that in a second, but also because at that convention, they announced that they're going to organize Amazon and made a lot of big waves about talking about what's happening at UPS and how they're intending to strike UPS next year. So, that's got a lot of stuff going on for the Teamsters, and on top of that, the state of the American labor movement is not great. So in the private sector economy, I think it's about 6% of private sector workers are members of unions or represented by unions now, which means that 94% are not, right? So the vast majority of the workforce is not organized. But the Teamsters are a large union, over 1 million members, in largely the private economy, right, which gives them a lot of potential power, and also mostly located in logistics, which is moving stuff. And especially in the pandemic, everybody's moving stuff. I mean, stuff is moving faster than ever all over the world, but also there's a lot more expectation that things come directly to your door. So small package, large freight, all that stuff is usually part of the Teamsters core industries. So I wanted to explain a little bit about what I think is going on in the Teamsters Union, the dynamics in there, and some things that we can expect. These will be opening remarks. I'm not going to be able to touch on everything, but I'm sure when we have some more discussion, I can get on it. But I think the first thing that I really want to touch in is the situation in the Teamsters is essentially the way that I've characterized it. There was a split in the old leadership. So the Hoffa administration had ruled for 20 plus years. They were able to do that for a lot of reasons, but mostly the Teamsters is a pretty decentralized union. So you get local officers who kind of pledge their fealty to the IBT administration, and then when it comes time to vote, they turn out their votes by using the steward network and really pummeling the ballot, right? So Hoffa was able to do that for 20 plus years. And then, he retired. And so there's kind of this open seat about who's going to take over the union. And what made this really interesting was 5 years ago in 2017, there was the campaign of Teamsters United that was headed by Fred Zuckerman. And they got almost half of the rank and file vote for the IBT. That's particularly impressive because 92% of the delegates at that summer convention all voted for Hoffa. So what I mean is that there's a convention before the vote, and then that's where the candidates come out. Most all the delegates are local officers or staff, sometimes stewards. The delegates are elected, but the contest really favors those people. So you get a body of mostly the officers and staff of the union, and 92% of them voted for Hoffa, right? But half the membership did not. So there's this huge rift between the ranks and the leadership. And the ranks almost topple the sitting administration that way. So that put a lot of heat on this election, right? And you have an open seat. And what ended up happening is the old leadership essentially split in half. That's a characterization a lot of people might disagree with, right? But Sean O'Brien, who was typically part of the Hoffa camp, he was on the Hoffa ballot for a while, he went over to Teamsters United and said, like, I want to run this ticket. They put him at the top. And so he ended up winning the election. I think that changed a lot of things in the union, because keep in mind, 2016, 92% of delegates went with Hoffa, only 8% was Zuckerman. In the last election, about 60% went over to O'Brien, right? So the leadership cuts itself right about in half, 60-40, more or less, going with one hand, you got O'Brien, and the other hand, Varma. So they don't have complete agreement at the top about the direction. And that's basically the way that the election splits when the membership votes. So it's 66-33, and O'Brien wins. He campaigned very heavily on UPS, and there's a really good reason for that, which is because the people that have international contracts, right, are some of the people that have the most stake in the international elections. Most Teamsters, their contract is held at the local level. So what happens at the IBT doesn't have direct effect on your employment and what's going to happen with your contract. But if you work at UPS, your bargaining team is selected by the IBT. So if you've got bad contracts, you have a big investment in how and who's sitting at the top. So O'Brien really effectively used a lot of the anger over that to push himself over the top. And the other side basically didn't vote. Since the IBT has a lot of oversight because of past corruption, you can see how the votes went down by local, and most of the old guard locals that didn't go with O'Brien just didn't vote. So it's an interesting kind of problem, right? And the reason I go through that is to say, is this an amazing progressive change in the Teamsters? I don't think so. That's my opinion. But the good thing about it is they've raised expectations, particularly around UPS, right? So they did campaign very hard to say what's happening at UPS is wrong. Bad contracts have come down, and UPSers need better. And now we'll see what happens. So they've been banging the drums of war, saying they're going to strike UPS next year. And there's a lot of reference to the 1997 UPS strike, which was, if you were young like me and not old enough to know about it at the time, the UPS 1997 strike was a huge event under Ron Kerry's administration in the Teamsters. It really kind of popularized the idea of part-time work being just completely bullshit for working people, and gave a sense of collective power for workers in the country. There's some particulars about that strike that make it different than now. The bosses did not expect that strike to happen. This one's different because they've been saying for the last 2 years that they will strike them. So it's a very open question, I think, about what will happen next year when that contract is up. How will that play out? Is that going to, are we going to see that strike through? What level of organization is there going to be? So the other, how am I doing on time, Sherry, by the way?
You had around 9 minutes.
Okay, great. The other stuff that's come up has been around organizing Amazon. And, at this labor notes, I think you saw some interesting tension between a number of unions about how is Amazon going to be organized. The Amazon Labor Union is independent, just won one election. They lost another one, but they were able to win representation in an election where nobody else has been able to so far. But the Teamsters are very adamant that it's their intention to claim Amazon as an industry that should be in the union. So it's not I think we all have an interest in seeing Amazon organized. I don't know that anybody has the answer about how to do that, but it's something that we need to watch out for. And I think the strike at UPS potentially has a big impact on that, because if you want to show workers in a similar industry what you're made out of, you gotta show it in practice first. So it could be a big selling point if they manage to push it through. Yeah, so the union itself is in an interesting position too, because like everybody, it's been hammered by the pandemic. It's been a lot of shops have closed down, and the union's lost a lot of members, and by their own admission, and they're trying to figure out how to rebuild. And I think that also leaves the IBT in a position where some very different things could happen, or we could double down and do a lot of the same. So I think it's a really interesting time in the union. I think there's some dangers that lie ahead. One of them is because of the decentralized nature of the union. Everything that people are talking about has to do with the international and what's happening across the entire country. But 4/5 of members are not under those contracts. They're not under international contracts. So there's a lot of people that are not part of this conversation about what's going on in the union and what their experience is. And I think the IBT has a hard line to walk in terms of how they're going to intervene in that effectively with a split leadership. Yeah, I think maybe I'll leave it there. We'll see where the discussion goes, but hopefully that gives a good overview for comrades.
Thanks so much, Andy. By the way, as you said, the UPS strike of '97, I'm in my office, actually. I'm an organizer at Rutgers AUPAFT, and the office I occupy was occupied by the person who launched the fight for the part-time lecturers union, and hanging in the office still prominently is Part-Time America Won't Work, which was the picket sign of the Teamsters in '97 in that successful strike. So it inspired people well beyond the ranks of folks in logistics, that's for sure. Which I guess appropriately enough, Ye-Eun is our comrade Ye-Eun Jeong, also a member of the Tempest Collective, is a graduate worker at Columbia University, the striking Columbia grads who have a lot to teach folks in higher ed, a member of UAW 2710, and I'm gonna welcome her to share with us some thoughts.
Hello. I guess I'm going to take the discussion in a bit like a different direction. Maybe people expected that I would talk about the strike, but what I would like to talk about today is about like my own experience at Labor Notes from the perspective of someone who went there for the first time and who also got very recently involved into labor organizing through the strike we conducted last year at Columbia. So my main impression was that Labor Notes was very heavily focused on workshops and trainings devoted mainly to organizational questions. I thought it was really cool that there was like a focus on democratic practices. There was a whole series of workshops actually, which were devoted to this question. And it seems to have also been like a recurrent theme in other workshops I went. And generally, I think it was a good occasion where organizers could learn about other struggles that happened in the country and connect with organizers across the country, as well as internationally. But I guess what was a bit lacking for me was any serious attempt to link this practical organizational questions and extend union struggles to broader anti-capitalist struggles. So I do understand, I came to understand very quickly that most unions in the US, politely put, are currently very far from being very, anything like a side of radical struggles, in that they are mostly bureaucratic institutions with very little opportunity for rank and files to self-organize. And that in that sense, I imagine that the majority of leftist organizers' energy within unions is spent on just fighting against the union bureaucracy. So I understand in that sense the desire to prioritize the more immediate practical questions of how to reform unions within themselves, through such questions as how to form a rank and file caucus, how to fight against the union bureaucrat, etc., to which a lot of workshops at labor notes were actually devoted. And the thought here seems to be that we can't broach any of these broader political issues, these more broader structural issues, the relationship between labor movements and broader leftist or radical struggles, without making unions democratic spaces in the first place. And I think that's correct. But at the same time, I do not see why these larger discussions on the role of labor unions within radical or anti-capitalist struggles cannot also happen at the same time as these more immediate practical discussions. And to sort of explain where I'm coming from, out of my own experience when I first got into labor organizing, it was really when I came to see that the work that I'm doing within my union was part of a larger anti-capitalist or radical attempt to push people to self-organize and become to that process politically conscious, that I really started to see value in organizing my union. And it's really once I was able to see, in a sense, the question of union democracy from this larger political perspective as an attempt to create a political space where people realize that it takes collective organizing to win anything, a realization without which no radical movement can happen, that I came to really be committed to the importance of rank and file unionism within my own workplace. And I think that to be a bit blunt, what I think labor has ended up doing by diversing this issue of union democracy, which was a lot discussed from this larger political perspective, is to have kind of depoliticized this issue to me and made it a purely organizational question, which is kind of peculiar to a particular institution called labor unions. And I guess in that sense, I was a bit disappointed because I thought that labor-ness would have been a great occasion for organizers to come together to reflect and discuss about the political role and significance of their daily organizational activities in a broader sense. I assume that not all of the 4,000 people who attended labor notes necessarily have this type of reflections or even the time to think about these kind of things. So I guess I did kind of expect these kind of discussions, but I was a bit disappointed on that note. But not to say that it was a great occasion, and I'm really happy to have been there. That's about it, I guess.
Thanks, Ye-Eun. Really appreciate your thoughts. We're going to open it up here for questions, comments, discussion on here. I don't know if anybody's monitoring or looking at the Facebook feed to see if there's comments or questions there. It would be helpful if somebody who's not me can do that, because I do not multitask, she says proudly. So if there are questions, you can, I think, by the way, is there a recording of the conversation, or are we ending the live stream? We usually end the live stream with the conversation, yes? Okay, so we'll cut that so people can, I don't know, speak more freely? No idea. If you want to, it's probably easiest to put your name in the chat, or just write the word stack in the chat if you want to pose a question either to one of the speakers or to someone else here in this Zoom group. So go ahead.
Can I ask a question, Ivan?